Thank you very much, and congratulations to New Holland Publishing for doing what none of the great big fat publishers would do. It's wonderful to have, how will I put this, a little bit of competition in the business of publishing of ideas and of information. Now, this evening has been an experience to me rather like Rumpole of the Bailey, in those scenes in Rumpole where Rumpole turned up with his collar undone or collar astray or something a little bit wrong in his appearance, and the judge on the bench would keep fiddling with his collar in order to try to persuade Rumpole to fix himself up. Well, I know tonight I am in the presence of a very large number of control freaks. I know that, and perhaps that's very significant for this book. I know it because I had an earlier engagement tonight at Rose Bay with a group of feisty ladies. They had been Qantas hosties, as we used to call them, hostesses, back in the 1980s and 90s, and they discovered that they were not having the same employment benefits as the stewards. The hostesses, for example, got paid less, but more important for them, they had to resign at the age of 35. The males could go on forever and ever because their beauty didn't seem to matter to Qantas. How things change. But the women had to go at 35, and so they were sick of putting up with it, and they took a case to the Equal Opportunity Commission in New South Wales under the anti-discrimination law, and they won, and then they took it through the tribunals and the courts, and ultimately they came to the Court of Appeal, and lo and behold, I was sitting in the case. And so also was Chief Justice Murray Gleeson and Justice Ken Handley. And at the end of the case, Chief Justice Gleeson and I found in favour of the hosties, and Justice Handley dissented. It was a 2-to-1 majority. That sort of thing happens in courts in the the hostesses won, and so from that moment on, they were entitled to the same benefits of employment as the males, and they bear out the Qantas principle that the important thing in a flight attendant, as they were thereafter called, is the safety of the passengers. And the safety of the passengers can often be better protected by flight attendants with experience. And so I've been going to little functions with these wonderful women over the past 10 years. They're really the only litigants that I've ever met afterwards. The judges don't tend to meet the people. You never see them again. They wander in, they have their day, and then they wander out. But these women are still at it, and they had me along. They're doing a doco for SBS, and the doco is being filmed, and there were films there tonight, and they had champagne supplied by SBS, but I'm afraid it was a very cheap cloth and not the sort of thing these women would have served with gusto in Qantas first class. And they all wanted to give me a kiss, and so I've got these lovely big fat red kisses on me, which everybody in this control freak audience came up to me and they all said, do you know, I don't like to mention this, but, so all I can say to you all is, get over it. And it's entirely appropriate. I don't have very many experiences in my life with all this lovely lipstick on my collar and on my cheeks, and so I think it's entirely appropriate for Matty's book, and it's a great book. Now, I learned very early in my life that people, not just Australians, but people generally, don't like to talk about sex. They like to have it, they like to think about it, they like to do things about it, but they don't really like to talk about it. They like to keep it very, very quiet and very private. And it was effectively that attitude which really led to a horrible life when I was young. And the fact that I had to pretend that I was different sexually than I was. I never really knew why I had to pretend, but I knew that that was what was expected of me. And it was really a great scientist, Alfred Kinsey, who was actually an expert on bees. His big area was bees. And he switched to being interested in human beings. And so he then took what is a scientific approach of collecting information. And that information was an enormous shock to the prudish American system. He was condemned by the Cardinal Archbishop of Indianapolis. Strangely enough, he worked in Bloomington, Indiana, at the Indiana University, where I'll be going in a few weeks' time. And the Vice Chancellor or President of that university, when the Cardinal Archbishop said he's got to stop this research, he said, if what Dr. Kinsey is doing is an appropriate matter for scientific investigation, it will be done at Indiana University. And so it was done, and that scientific approach was adopted. And really, that was the beginning of the change, because once it became known that there was a certain pretty stable group in the community who were gay, that there were bisexual people, that there were trans people, that there were intersex people, and that there were women who were not having a life which was fulfilling, and that people everywhere had these habits and behaviours in their sexual lives, all of which Dr. Kinsey was determined to explain and reveal. His first book was Sexual Behaviour in the Human Male, and his second book was Sexual Behaviour in the Human Female. And they were scientific books, and they revolutionised the attitude to sex. The issue of equal rights for gays didn't really begin at Stonewall. You know, Americans like to take over these things and say it happened in this incident, but it happened years before this incident, in the 1940s, when Dr. Kinsey published his work. And that led to a royal commission in England, and that led to change in the British laws, and that led on to changes in Canada, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, and slowly but surely, very slowly, and with a lot of opposition from churches, it's begun to happen in other countries. Last year, a great decision of the Supreme Court of India liberated millions of gay people in that country and just struck down the laws against gays which the British had kindly left there in India. And it's a wonderful thing that law embraces reality, and that reality is based on science. And effectively that's what this excellent book has done. Now, I know that I had to be very quiet about my sexuality for a very long time. And I know that that was largely at the behest of churches. Their position is really not a rational position. Their position was, and in many cases still is, we know you're out there, we know you're there, and if you pretend, we'll leave you alone. And I went along with that for a long while, but then eventually it was over. And truth will set you free. And this is why this book is a truth-telling book of what are the real issues in sex. Gays will talk about sex until the cows come home because they've been oppressed in that department in their life. But straight people are much more disinclined to talk about it, I can tell you. And therefore this book, which is of course targeted at both a gay audience but also at an audience of heterosexuals, is extremely interesting. I mean, sex is inherently fascinating and interesting, as Dr. Kinsey revealed. And the large number of controversies that are revealed in the book indicate that Matty is a true daughter of Alfred Kinsey. She is following in the scientific approach of collecting the information and the knowledge and sharing it with the rest of society. She comes from the Netherlands. Now, my partner Jan, who is here tonight, is also from the Netherlands, and they are very difficult people. You know, you won't believe this, folks, but they think Anglo-Saxons are extremely hypocritical and not inclined to the truth, whereas they are extremely blunt and they stand for the truth, and you'd better get used to it. If you can't, well, you mustn't have a relationship with somebody from the Netherlands. But in fact, it's the truth-telling of the book which is marvellous. And one of the chapters, for example, has Matty explaining how in the Netherlands they're much more realistic about the sexual lives of the 16 and 17-year-old children, and how coming home with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and sometimes maybe a couple of friends, to the family home is something which is generally accepted, and that is the real world, and therefore they don't go along easily with the notion it's okay, but just keep it to yourself. They believe in honesty and openness. So this is a product of somebody who not only has practical empirical experience, but also has a Netherlands streak to tell it as it is, in the belief that in the end that is good and healthy for society. There will be people in our country who will not like this book. There were big fat publishers who would not publish this book, but it will, I believe, spread the truth, and that will be good, because sex is important to everybody, almost everybody in society, and it's therefore a good thing that their questions will be answered, and the intriguing issues of life will be there where they can read it privately, and that will help them with facing the problems of life. So, I congratulate Matty on a fantastic and readable book. Matty, you did it. You had a lot of opposition. You had people who didn't want to have this book, but it has been published and it's readable. The chapters are very brief. They're much briefer than court judgments, I can tell you. They are brief, they are punchy, they've got a factual foundation, and it's a very readable book. And it's extremely rude of people to come to a book launch, especially coming and then pointing out that the launcher has lipstick on his collar and then to walk away without buying this. And so I will be standing at the door with a very censorious look to inspect anybody who leaves without buying. I have much pleasure in launching Matty Silver, Sex Down Under, and it's published by New Holland Publishing, and it's a masterpiece and everybody should have it to take home.
Hey, hey. Oh, very appropriate. Timing.
I'm afraid I can't talk like you do, Michael, but so I have to read it.
Matty, if you can move a bit more over there, that would be great.
And I'll open this up.
Thank you. Okay.
Give me the kiss, Matty. Yeah, my lipstick doesn't fit with the other ones. Anyway, thank you, Warren and Michael. Thank you,
I
Warren.
don't need any help getting it off.
Thank you, Warren and Michael, for your kind words. And a thank you to everyone for coming tonight.
You just need to put it closer to your mouth, Matty.
Like you're about to suck it.
There you go. There you go. All right. You all right? Can I hold it? Yeah, I'll hold it. It's fine.
Great, yeah, great. Yes. And a thank you to everyone for coming to the launch tonight, especially our host, the Harry Hartog Bookshop, and Nina. My special thanks to all my friends and colleagues who have helped and encouraged me on this adventure. I'm very excited that my book is finally being published because I never realized how difficult the process would be, especially for a book that has the word sex in the title. I always thought that sex sells, but I was so wrong.
It will.
My friend Harry Williamson designed a brilliant, where are you, Harry? Anyway, he's there. He designed a brilliant book cover featuring the title Sex Down Under, and we produced a 30-page mock-up. Last year, May, I sent it to almost every publishing house in Australia, being convinced that surely some publisher would be interested. However, it didn't happen. I was told the title could create a big hurdle for the customer picking up the book and taking it to the counter. Let alone reading it in public, it will scare readers off. Another publisher said, no one will buy a book with the word sex on the cover. No one will buy their friends or family a book like that for Christmas. Or we don't do lifestyle books, we only sell serious books. But what I don't understand is why are cooking books so popular? Every Christmas, the market seems flooded with new ones. I assume these books are mainly bought by people who love cooking, wanting to try out new recipes and just become better cooks. But I'm pretty sure that most people would like to be better at having sex and become good lovers. And there are very few books on the market that do that. So my main reason for writing the book is trying to normalize sex and to encourage people to feel more comfortable about it. That's what my book is about, giving information and insights on how to have better relationships and have better sex. That's why I called it Sex Education for Grown-ups. My book opens doors to all sorts of sexual preferences, problems and advice. It's a conversation starter for parents, lovers, partners and teenagers to talk about issues that have been too embarrassing to raise. The book offers readers simple tips, advice and information aimed at creating healthy attitudes to sex and dispelling many of the unhealthy myths and taboos that prevent people from having a satisfying sex life. Developing a healthy attitude to sex will improve self-esteem, confidence, the quality of relationship, and overall well-being and mental health. I can assure you, by having counseled so many couples and single people now over 10 years, that I have concluded most people are not very good at sex. True. Which, in a way, is not really that surprising. Because whatever we do in our professional life, we have to study and train for many years to be good at it. But on how to have sex or a relationship, we don't receive any education at all. We're just thrown in the deep end. The lack of proper sex education in our schools has a lot to answer for, and we can mainly blame our conservative governments for that.
Yes.
For example, in the Netherlands, things are different. It's the law that all primary and high school students receive sex education and relationship education. The main reason for this is that the country has a liberal attitude towards sex. The Dutch believe that young people are curious about sexuality and have a right to adequate sex education so they can make well-informed choices in sexuality and relationships, and they are ready. Thankfully, New Holland publishers were very happy to take on the project, and here we are. The book has 40 chapters, and I'm pretty sure that most readers will learn about some issues and conditions they didn't even know about. Some of the areas I'm passionate about are male sexual performance anxiety, vaginismus, menopause, the dangers of gay conversion therapy, teenagers and porn, and what religion does to our sex lives. I tell my religious clients who are overwhelmed by feelings of sexual guilt that I do not believe any God would have created men and women with sexual organs that can give them pleasure if they were simply supposed to be used for procreation. Many of my clients I have seen over the years had initially turned to their GPs when they experienced problems with sexual issues. But while going to the doctor is straightforward if you have stomach pains, seeking help with sexual problems is very embarrassing for most. It was therefore disappointing to hear that many of my clients felt their doctor was not helpful at all, or found it difficult to talk about sexual issues themselves. Asking patients about sexual matters is an important part of collecting their medical history, but many physicians don't take sexual histories from their patients. It helps to identify sexual problems and concerns the patient may have, and can also be helpful in establishing a more open and trusting relationships between doctor and patient. But then again, it's not easy for doctors to diagnose patients with the short appointment times they have these days. Therefore, referring them to a sex therapist who spends at least 1 hour with them is the best outcome for patients. Anyway, this will give you a bit of an idea what the book is about. What I would like to happen is that anyone who buys the book will be brave enough to read it on the bus, in the train, or leave it on your desk at work, without feeling you have to hide the book, just because it has the word sex written on the cover. And why not buy the book for your family or friends for Christmas? It will certainly brighten up the talk around the festive table.
We're going to now see whether you're actually paying attention to Matty's message, because it's customary at the end of book launches, near the end of formalities, to have a question and answer.